The iron bars felt cold against Grace Pemberton's palms as she pressed her face between them, watching the night orderly shuffle past her cell door without a second glance. And in that moment she knew tonight would be her only chance to prove she was not the mad woman they claimed her to be. 3 months had passed since her stepbrother Richard had signed the papers committing her to the Springfield State Asylum for the insane. 3 months since she had witnessed him murder their father for the family ranch. 3 months since her screams of truth had been twisted into symptoms of hysteria and female delusion. The year was 1883, and the world had no patience for a 22-year-old woman who dared accuse a respectable man of patricide, especially when that man had the town doctor and the county sheriff in his pocket. The lock on her door had been loose for a week now, ever since the new maintenance man had fumbled the repair job and never returned to finish it. Grace had tested it every night, waiting for the perfect moment when the staff rotations left the eastern corridor unwatched for precisely 17 minutes. She had counted, memorized, planned with the clarity of mind that proved she did not belong in this place of tortured souls and genuine madness. Her father had raised her to be sharp, to think like a rancher and a businesswoman, and those skills served her now as she worked the lock free with a bent spoon she had hidden in her mattress. The mechanism gave way with a soft click that sounded like thunder in her ears. Grace froze, listening for footsteps, for voices, for any indication that someone had heard. Only the distant moaning of another patient and the whistle of November wind through the cracked windows answered her. She slipped into the hallway, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor, wearing nothing but the thin asylum gown that marked her as an inmate. The orderlies had taken her clothes, her shoes, everything that might help her survive in the world beyond these walls. But she could not wait any longer. Richard was selling off parcels of her father's land piece by piece, and soon there would be nothing left to fight for. The eastern door had been left propped open by a careless worker, just as she had observed for the past 3 nights. Grace slipped through it into the bitter Missouri darkness, where frost already glittered on the ground like broken glass. The asylum sat on the outskirts of Springfield, surrounded by woods that would offer cover but also danger for a woman alone and unmarked by civilization's protection. She ran anyway, her breath coming in white clouds, her feet already going numb from the cold. Behind her, the asylum loomed like a gothic nightmare against the star-filled sky, but she did not look back. The woods swallowed her whole, branches catching at her hair and gown, roots threatening to trip her with every desperate step. Grace pushed through the underbrush, ignoring the cuts that opened on her arms and legs, focusing only on distance and direction. She needed to reach Nevada, Missouri, where her father's old friend Judge Harrison resided. He was the one man who might listen, who might help her expose Richard's crimes before the last of her inheritance disappeared into her stepbrother's greedy hands. Nevada was 2 days' walk south, maybe 3 in her condition, and she had no food, no water, no protection from the elements or from the men who would surely come looking for an escaped lunatic. Hours passed in a blur of pain and determination. The moon rose high and cold, casting silver shadows through the bare November branches. Grace's feet left bloody prints on the frost-covered ground, but she could not stop. When dawn finally broke over the Missouri landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, she had put perhaps 10 miles between herself and the asylum. Her body shook with cold and exhaustion, and she knew she needed shelter, warmth, or she would die out here in the wilderness, and Richard would win everything. A ribbon of smoke rising from beyond a line of cottonwood trees drew her attention. Civilization meant danger, but it also meant survival. Grace approached cautiously, her teeth chattering so hard she feared they might shatter. Through the trees she glimpsed a small camp, a single figure moving around a fire, the shapes of horses tethered nearby. A traveler, then, not a homestead. She watched for several minutes, trying to determine if this was a man who might help or hurt her, But the cold made the decision for her. If she did not get warm soon, the choice would be taken from her permanently. Grace stumbled into the clearing on legs that barely held her weight. The man at the fire turned sharply, his hand dropping to the revolver at his hip with the practiced ease of someone who lived ready for trouble. He was tall and lean, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that assessed her with startling intensity. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, dusty denim and worn leather, a battered hat hanging on his saddle horn. For a long moment they simply stared at each other, predator and prey, though which was which remained unclear. "Please," Grace managed through her shaking, her voice hoarse from disuse. The asylum discouraged talking, discouraged everything that made a person human. "I need help." The cowboy's eyes traveled over her asylum gown, her bare feet, the cuts and bruises that decorated her exposed skin. His expression shifted from wariness to concern, and he slowly removed his hand from his weapon. "Madam, you look half frozen to death. Come here by the fire." Grace wanted to maintain some dignity, some pretense of control, but her body had reached its limit. She collapsed more than walked the final steps to the fire, and suddenly the cowboy was there, catching her before she hit the ground. His hands were warm and calloused, gentle despite their strength, and she found herself leaning into that warmth like a drowning woman clutching at driftwood. "Easy now," he murmured, guiding her to sit on his bedroll near the flames. "I have got you. You are safe." He moved quickly, draping a thick wool blanket around her shoulders, pulling it tight to trap what little heat her body still generated. Then he was pouring something from a tin cup, pressing it into her hands. "Drink this. It is just coffee, but it is hot." Grace wrapped her fingers around the cup, nearly weeping at the sensation of warmth against her frozen skin. She sipped carefully, the bitter liquid burning down her throat and into her stomach. The cowboy crouched beside her, his brow furrowed with worry and questions he seemed reluctant to ask. She could see him taking in details, making judgments, and she knew what he must be thinking. A woman alone, dressed in asylum clothing, bloodied and wild-looking, the same conclusions everyone else had drawn. "My name is Dominic Garrett," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "I am heading down to Nevada on business. Where did you come from, madam?" This was the moment of truth. Grace could lie, could make up some story that would not immediately mark her as an escaped madwoman, but lies had helped put her in the asylum in the first place. Her stepbrother's lies, the doctor's lies, society's lie that women who spoke uncomfortable truths must be hysterical. She met Dominic's eyes, those surprisingly kind eyes, and decided to risk the truth. "My name is Grace Pemberton," she said quietly. "I escaped from Springfield State Asylum tonight, but I am not insane, Mr. Garrett. I was committed there by my stepbrother to silence me after I witnessed him murder my father." She watched his face carefully, waiting for the skepticism, the fear, the disgust that would make him either send her back or abandon her to her fate. Instead, Dominic simply studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently lifted one of her hands, examining the bruises that circled her wrists like dark bracelets. "Restraints," he said, and it was not a question. Grace nodded, surprised that he recognized the marks. "They tied me down when I tried to tell the doctors the truth. They said I was having episodes, that I was dangerous to myself and others, but I was just trying to make someone listen." Dominic released her hand carefully and sat back on his heels. "My mother's sister was sent to an asylum when I was a boy," he said quietly. She was not mad either. She was just inconvenient to her husband, who wanted to marry his mistress without the messiness of divorce. She died in that place 3 years later, and no one would listen when we tried to tell them she did not belong there. His jaw tightened, old anger and grief passing across his features like clouds over the sun. "The law gives men too much power over the women in their lives, And institutions like asylums make it easy to hide abuse behind medical authority. Grace felt tears prick her eyes, the first real tears she had allowed herself since the nightmare began. Someone believed her. This stranger, this cowboy she had stumbled across by pure chance or providence, believed her when her own friends and neighbors had turned away. "You do not think I am mad?" "I think you are cold and hurt and scared," Dominic said simply. "But mad? No, madam. Mad people do not usually have the clarity to plan and execute an escape, and they do not tell their stories with the kind of specific detail you just gave me. They also do not look at a man the way you are looking at me right now, weighing whether I am a threat or an ally, calculating your options." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That is intelligence and self-preservation, not insanity." Grace pulled the blanket tighter around herself, hardly daring to hope. "I need to get to Nevada, Missouri. My father's friend, Judge Harrison, might help me. He is the only person with enough authority and independence from Richard's influence to possibly investigate my claims." "Nevada is where I am headed." "I am," Dominic said. "I have business there, delivering horses to a ranch outside town. You can travel with me if you trust me enough to do so. It is about 2 days' ride, maybe 3 at an easy pace." He paused, then added carefully, "I will not pretend there is not risk for both of us in this arrangement. If they are looking for you, anyone found helping you could face legal consequences, and you would be alone on the trail with a strange man, which carries its own dangers. I can give you my word that I mean you no harm, but I know that may not mean much from someone you just met." Grace looked at this man who had shown her more kindness in 10 minutes than anyone had in 3 months. She had learned to read people working alongside her father on the ranch, dealing with cowhands and cattlemen and traveling merchants. Some people wore their nature on their faces in the way they moved and spoke and treated those weaker than themselves. Dominic Garrett had gentle hands and sad eyes, and he had spoken of his aunt with the kind of anger that came from helplessness in the face of injustice. She thought she could trust him, or at least trust him more than she could trust her chances alone in the wilderness. "I do not have much choice," she admitted. "Alone. I will probably die of exposure before I reach Nevada. And even if I survive, a woman traveling without escort dressed like this will be picked up as vagrant or mad within hours. You are offering me a chance, Mr. Garrett, and I am grateful for it. I can only hope that your faith in my sanity is well placed and that I can repay your kindness someday." "Call me Dominic," he said, rising to his feet. "And you do not owe me anything, Grace. Sometimes we help people because it is the right thing to do, not because we expect repayment." He moved to his saddlebags, rummaging through them with purpose. "I do not have much in the way of women's clothing, but I have got a spare shirt and some trousers that might fit you well enough. They will be too big, but better than traveling in that asylum gown. And I have got an extra pair of socks in my old boots. They will probably be too large as well. But we can stuff the toes with cloth." He handed her the bundle of clothing, then politely turned his back to give her privacy while she changed. Grace's fingers fumbled with the buttons and laces, clumsy from cold and disuse. The asylum had dressed and undressed her like a child for 3 months, and it felt strange to perform such basic tasks for herself again. The shirt swallowed her frame, and the trousers required the belt cinched to its tightest notch to stay up, but they were warm and clean and smelled of soap and wood smoke instead of carbolic acid and despair. The boots were indeed too large, but Dominic had been right about the cloth stuffing, and they would protect her feet from further damage. "You can look now," she said softly. Dominic turned back, and something flickered in his eyes as he took in her transformed appearance. "You look less like an escaped patient and more like a young ranch hand now. That is good. Less likely to draw the wrong kind of attention." He poured more coffee and handed her a piece of jerky from his supplies. "Eat slowly. Your stomach probably is not ready for much after asylum food." Grace nibbled at the dried meat, savoring the flavor and substance of it. Asylum meals had been thin gruel and stale bread, barely enough to sustain life. "How did you know about asylum food?" "My aunt wrote to us before the end," Dominic said quietly, settling across the fire from her. Her letters talked about the conditions, the food, The treatments they subjected her to. The family tried to get her out, but her husband had legal custody, and the doctor supported his claims that she was improving under their care. By the time he finally agreed to release her, she was too weak to recover. The asylum had broken something essential in her, even though her mind remained clear to the end. He stared into the flames, jaw tight. I was 15 when she died, old enough to understand the injustice, but too young to do anything about it. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in a similar situation, I would not hesitate. I am sorry about your aunt, Grace said, and meant it. What was her name? Margaret. We called her Maggie. Dominic looked up, meeting Grace's eyes across the fire. She would have liked you, I think. She was fierce like you, unwilling to accept the limitations society placed on women. That is what got her committed in the first place. She wanted to keep her own money after marriage, wanted to have a say in family decisions. Her husband called it hysteria. They fell silent for a while, the fire crackling between them, the morning sun climbing higher in the sky. Grace felt warmth seeping back into her bones, felt the fog of cold and exhaustion beginning to lift. She studied Dominic when he was not looking, taking in the strong lines of his profile, the capable way he moved as he broke camp and prepared for travel. He was handsome in a rough, unpolished way, but more than that, he was kind. Kindness was rarer than gold in Grace's recent experience. We should talk about your story, Dominic said as he saddled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding. If anyone asks, you are my cousin who is traveling with me to Nevada to take a position as a school teacher. That explains the clothing and your presence without raising too many questions. We will avoid towns as much as possible, but we may need to stop for supplies. Grace nodded, appreciating his practical thinking. What should I know about you in case someone asks questions? Cousins would know each other's histories. Fair point. Dominic helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed slightly. I am from a small ranch outside of Sedalia, Missouri. My father died 5 years ago, and I've been working as a drover and horse trader since, sending money back to my mother and younger sister. I am 26 years old, never married, and I have a reputation for being decent with horses and reliable in my business dealings. Your turn. I am 22, Grace said. My mother died when I was 10, and my father raised me on our ranch near Springfield. He remarried when I was 16 to a widow with a son named Richard Pemberton. My father died 3 months ago. Richard claimed he fell from his horse and broke his neck, but I saw Richard strike him with a shovel during an argument about selling ranch land. When I tried to tell the sheriff, Richard convinced the doctor that I was having hysterical delusions brought on by grief. Within a week, I was committed. Dominic's expression darkened. And the sheriff believed him? The sheriff and Richard served together in the war. They are friends, or as close to friends as a man like Richard can have, and I am just a woman, Dominic. My word against his. Grief-stricken daughter against grieving stepson. The world was always going to believe him over me. Bitterness crept into Grace's voice despite her attempt to control it. The world is often wrong, Dominic said firmly. He finished with the saddle and turned to face her fully. Grace, I want you to know that I believe you, and I'm going to help you prove the truth. We will get you to Judge Harrison, and if he will not help, we will find someone who will. Your stepbrother is not going to get away with murder and theft. The conviction in his voice made something warm unfurl in Grace's chest, something that had been frozen tight since the asylum doors had closed behind her. Hope, she realized. She was feeling hope again, and it was a gift more precious than she could express. Why are you doing this? You do not know me. I could be exactly what they say I am. Dominic stepped closer, and Grace found herself looking up into eyes that were brown flecked with gold in the morning sunlight. Because I believe in justice, sure, he said simply. And because something in my gut tells me you are telling the truth, I have learned to trust my instincts about people, and my instincts say you are a good woman who was dealt a terrible hand by fate and her stepbrother's greed. He paused, then added with a slight smile, Also, my Aunt Maggie would come back and haunt me if I left you here to freeze." Despite everything, Grace found herself smiling back. "Well, we cannot have that. Ghosts are terrible travel companions, I hear." "The worst," Dominic agreed. He moved to his horse and mounted easily, then reached down to help Grace up. "You will have to ride with me until we can get you your own horse. Have you ridden before?" "I grew up on a ranch," Grace reminded him, taking his hand and letting him pull her up behind him. The movement sent pain shooting through her abused body, but she bit back a gasp and settled onto the horse's back, wrapping her arms around Dominic's waist to steady herself. "I can ride better than most men I know. Just give me a horse, and I will prove it." She felt rather than saw his smile. "I believe you. But for now, just hold on and try to rest if you can. We have got a long ride ahead of us." They rode south through the Missouri countryside, following game trails and creek beds rather than main roads. Dominic kept them to a steady but unhurried pace, and Grace found herself relaxing against his back despite her best intentions to maintain some proper distance. He was warm and solid, and the gentle rocking of the horse's gait conspired with her exhaustion to make her drowsy. She must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing she knew, the sun had moved considerably across the sky and Dominic was speaking quietly. "Grace, we are going to stop for a while to let the horse rest and get some food in you." She straightened, embarrassed to realize she had been sleeping against him like a child. "I am sorry. I did not mean to fall asleep on you." "You needed the rest," Dominic said without judgment. He dismounted and helped her down, his hands firm on her waist. "There is a stream just through those trees. Why do not you go wash up while I set up camp? We will stay here for a few hours, let you recover some strength." The stream was cold and clear, running over smooth stones that had been tumbled soft by centuries of water. Grace knelt on the bank and splashed her face, washing away the grime of the asylum in the forest. Her reflection wavered in the current, and she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Thinner than she remembered, with shadows under her eyes and a wariness in her expression that had not been there before Richard had destroyed her life. But alive, she reminded herself, alive and free and fighting back. When she returned to camp, Dominic had laid out more food, simple fare of jerky, hardtack, and some dried apples that tasted like heaven after months of deprivation. They ate in companionable silence, the awkwardness that might have existed between strangers tempered by the extremity of their circumstances. Grace found herself studying Dominic between bites, wondering about this man who had so easily come to her aid, who spoke of justice and dead ants and seemed to carry sadness like a well-worn coat. "Tell me about your horse trading business, Bois," she said, wanting to know more about him, wanting to fill the silence with something other than her own dark thoughts. Dominic looked up, surprised by the question but not displeased. "Not much to tell, really. After my father died, the ranch went to my uncle as the oldest surviving male relative. My mother and sister are allowed to stay there, but we have no ownership, no say in how it is run. I did not want to work my uncle's land for scraps, so I struck out on my own. I am good with horses, always have been, and there is decent money in buying wild stock, gentling them, and selling them to ranchers who need working animals." "You gentle them yourself?" Grace asked, impressed despite herself. "Mostly. Sometimes I work with other drovers, but I prefer doing it alone. Horses respond better to one consistent handler, I think. Less confusion, more trust." He broke off a piece of hardtack, considering it before continuing. "It is lonely work sometimes, but it is mine. I answer to no one, make my own choices, keep my own profits. There is freedom in that, even if there is not always comfort." Grace understood that sentiment more than he probably realized. "I always wanted to run my father's ranch someday. He taught me everything, treated me like the son he never had. We talked about making me a partner when I turned 25, giving me legal ownership of a portion of the land. But then he married Richard's mother, and everything changed." "Did he change his plans?" Dominic asked carefully. "He tried not to. But Richard was always there, always pushing, always making himself indispensable. And then Richard's mother died 2 years after the marriage, and it was just the three of us. My father started talking about family legacy, about having a son to carry on the name. Even if Richard was only a stepson, I could see it slipping away, my future, my dreams. But I never thought. Her voice broke slightly. I never thought Richard would kill for it. I thought he would just wait for my father to die naturally and then contest any will that favored me. Dominic reached across the space between them and took her hand, his grip warm and grounding. You are going to get justice, Grace. We are going to make sure Richard answers for what he did. How? The word came out more desperate than she intended. I have no proof, no witnesses, just my word against his, and I am an escaped lunatic now. Even if Judge Harrison believes me, what can he do? I do not know yet, Dominic admitted, but giving up is not an option. We will figure something out. He squeezed her hand once before releasing it, and Grace felt the absence of his touch like a physical loss. For now, you need to focus on recovering your strength and staying free. The rest we will handle as it comes. They rested through the afternoon, Grace sleeping fitfully while Dominic kept watch. When evening approached, they mounted up again and continued south, using the fading light to cover as many miles as possible before full darkness made travel dangerous. Grace felt stronger now, more alert, and found herself noticing details she had missed in her earlier exhaustion. The way Dominic sat his horse with easy confidence, the quiet competence with which he navigated the landscape, the gentle hands on the reins that suggested a man comfortable with power but not needlessly harsh in its application. Do you have a sweetheart? The question escaped before Grace could stop it, and she immediately felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment. I'm sorry, that was too personal. I should not have asked. Dominic chuckled softly. It is all right. And no, I do not. There was a girl back in Sedalia a few years ago, but she wanted a husband who would stay put, work the family land, give her stability. I could not be that man, not with my circumstances, so she married someone else. I do not blame her for it. She made the practical choice. Do you regret it? Grace asked, genuinely curious. Sometimes, he admitted. Mostly late at night when the loneliness gets heavy. But I do not regret choosing freedom over a life that would have made me miserable. I just hope someday I can find someone who wants the same things I do, or at least someone willing to build something new together rather than following someone else's blueprint for how life should be. Grace tightened her arms around his waist slightly, a gesture of comfort and understanding. I think that is wise. Too many people marry for the wrong reasons and end up trapped in lives that slowly kill their spirits. My father and my mother had real love, the kind that made them partners rather than just husband and wife. He never found that again with Richard's mother, and I think he knew it. Their marriage was practical, companionable, but not passionate. He told me once near the end that I should hold out for the real thing, for someone who saw me as an equal rather than property or obligation. Your father sounds like he was a good man, Dominic said quietly. He was the best of men. Grief welled up in Grace's throat, thick and bitter. He deserved better than to die at the hands of his stepson in a dispute over money and land. He deserved to grow old, to see his ranch thrive, to know that his legacy would continue. Richard stole all of that from him, from me, from everyone who loved him. They rode on into the twilight, and Grace let herself cry silently against Dominic's back, her tears soaking into his shirt. He did not comment on it, did not try to comfort her with empty words, just kept riding steadily south while she grieved. It was exactly what she needed, that silent acceptance of her pain, that space to feel without judgment or expectation. By the time full darkness forced them to make camp for the night, Grace felt wrung out, but somehow lighter, as though the tears had washed away some of the poison the asylum had fed her. Dominic built their fire in a small hollow that would hide the light from distant eyes. They ate another simple meal, and Grace found herself studying him across the flames, seeing him not just as her rescuer, but as a man in his own right. He was not classically handsome in the way Richard was, with his polished charm and calculated smiles. Dominic's appeal was quieter, more authentic. It showed in the laugh lines around his eyes, the sun-weathered skin that spoke of days spent outdoors doing honest work, the calloused hands that were gentle despite their strength. "What are you thinking about?" Dominic asked, catching her staring. Grace considered lying, but she had promised herself honesty after months of being told her truths were delusions. "I was thinking that I am grateful it was you I stumbled across this morning and not someone else. And I was thinking that you are a good man, Dominic Garrett, better than most I have known." Even in the firelight, she could see the color rise in his cheeks. "I am just doing what anyone decent would do." "No," Grace said firmly. "Most people would have turned me in or left me to my fate. You chose to believe me and help me even though it puts you at risk. That is not ordinary decency. That is courage and kindness, and I will not let you diminish it by pretending otherwise." Dominic looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. "You are remarkable, you know that? After everything you have been through, you are still fighting, still seeing good in people. Many would have been broken by what Richard and that asylum did to you." "I came close," Grace admitted. "There were days in that place when I thought I might actually go mad, when the isolation and the treatments and the constant gaslighting made me question my own memories, but I held on to the truth of what I saw, to the image of my father's face, as Richard struck him down. That anger, that need for justice kept me sane when everything else tried to convince me I was not. We are going to get you that justice," Dominic promised again. "I swear it on my Aunt Maggie's memory and my own honor. Richard will answer for your father's murder." They settled in for the night, Dominic insisting Grace take the bedroll while he kept watch for the first half of the night. Grace wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could pull her own weight, but exhaustion overwhelmed her protests. She fell asleep almost instantly, wrapped in Dominic's spare blanket, breathing in the scent of wood smoke and horses and safety. She woke sometime in the deep night to find Dominic adding wood to the fire, his movements quiet and careful. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I meant to wake for my watch." "You needed the sleep more than I needed the help," Dominic said, settling back against his saddle. "Besides, I am used to sleeping light and keeping one ear open for trouble. Old habit from years on the trail." Grace sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders against the November chill. "Then at least let me keep you company for a while. It seems wrong to make you sit watch alone when this is as much my danger as yours." Dominic smiled, and even tired as he was, it transformed his face into something warm and open. "I would like that, actually. The nights get long when you're traveling alone." They talked quietly as the fire burned low, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their regrets. Grace learned that Dominic had wanted to be a veterinarian when he was young, that he had taught himself to read from his mother's books, that his favorite food was his sister's apple pie, and he had not tasted it in over a year. Dominic learned that Grace could shoot better than most men, that she had once won a horse race against the town champion, that she missed her father with an ache that never quite went away. "What will you do if we cannot prove Richard killed your father?" Dominic asked as the fire crumbled to embers. Grace was quiet for a long time, considering the question seriously. "I do not know," she finally admitted. "I cannot go back, cannot let him send me to that asylum again. Maybe I would head west, try to start over somewhere no one knows my face or my history. California, perhaps, or Oregon. Find work on a ranch somewhere, using what my father taught me." She looked at Dominic in the near darkness. "What would you do in my position?" "Fight until there was nothing left to fight with," Dominic said without hesitation. "But if fighting meant losing myself to that asylum again, I would run. I would disappear into the frontier and never look back, because surviving with your freedom and dignity intact matters more than revenge against someone who has already taken too much from you." "Is that what your aunt should have done?" Grace asked gently. Dominic's jaw tightened. "Yes, I wish she had run. Wish she had chosen herself over society's expectations and her husband's control. She might still be alive if she had, but women have fewer options than men for disappearing and starting over, and the world punishes them more harshly for trying. It is not fair, but it is true. Then maybe we should work on changing that, Grace said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Maybe surviving this is not enough. Maybe we need to fight so the next woman in my position has more options, better protections, voices that will believe her when she speaks truth to power. Dominic looked at her with something that might have been awe. You really are remarkable. Grace Pemberton. She felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the dying fire. I am just tired of being afraid and powerless, and I am tired of good people like your aunt paying with their lives for the convenience of men who see women as property rather than people. They finally slept as dawn approached, huddled close for warmth with the blanket shared between them. Grace woke a few hours later to find herself pressed against Dominic's side, his arm draped protectively over her. She should have moved away, should have maintained proper distance, but instead she let herself enjoy the warmth and security of his presence for a few stolen moments. When he stirred and realized their position, he immediately pulled back, stammering an apology that made Grace smile despite the awkwardness. It is cold, and we shared a blanket, she said simply. No harm done. They broke camp quickly and rode on, making good time through the rolling Missouri landscape. By midday, they encountered their first real challenge, a small settlement that straddled the creek they had been following, forcing them to either pass through or detour several miles out of their way. Dominic considered their options carefully before deciding to risk the direct route. Keep your head down and stay quiet, he instructed, as they approached the handful of buildings that made up the settlement. Let me do any talking that needs doing. They almost made it through without incident. They were passing the general store when a woman stepped out, her sharp eyes landing on Grace with uncomfortable intensity. You there, girl? I know you from somewhere. Where are you from? Grace felt panic rise in her throat, but Dominic answered smoothly before she could speak. This is my cousin, madam. She is traveling with me to Nevada to take a teaching position. Perhaps you are thinking of someone else? The woman squinted at Grace, suspicious but not certain. Maybe, but I could swear I've seen her face before. Been notices going around about an escaped patient from Springfield Asylum. Dangerous woman, they said. My cousin is a school teacher, not a patient, Dominic said firmly, with just enough indignation to sound believable. And I would appreciate you not spreading rumors that could damage her reputation before she even arrives at her new position. Good day, madam. He urged the horse forward before the woman could respond, but Grace could feel the suspicious gaze following them as they left the settlement behind. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. She recognized me. There are notices out. Dominic, they are hunting for me. Breathe, Dominic instructed calmly, though she could feel the tension in his body. She was not certain, and we will be out of the area soon. But you are right that it is more dangerous than I thought. We need to get you to Nevada quickly before word spreads too far. They rode hard the rest of the day, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the settlement. By evening, Grace felt like one massive bruise, her body protesting the pace after months of asylum confinement. When Dominic finally called a halt, she practically fell from the horse, her legs buckling under her. He caught her again, his strong hands steadying her, and Grace found herself leaning into him more than was strictly proper. I am sorry, she gasped. I thought I was stronger than this. You escaped an asylum, walked through freezing woods, and have been riding all day with minimal food and rest, Dominic said, lowering her gently to the ground. The fact that you are still conscious is impressive. Most people would have collapsed miles ago. He made camp with quick efficiency while Grace sat wrapped in the blanket, trying to regain her composure. When he handed her food and water, his fingers brushed hers, and Grace felt a spark of something she had not experienced in months. Attraction, she realized with surprise. Despite everything, despite the horror and fear and uncertainty, she was attracted to this kind cowboy who had saved her life and believed her truth. Dominic, she said quietly, not sure what she meant to say next, but needing to say something. He looked up from the fire, his eyes meeting hers across the flames. Yes? Thank you. For everything. For believing me, for helping me, for treating me like a person instead of a problem or a patient. I know I've already said it, but I need you to understand how much it means to me. You saved my life, but more than that, you gave me back my hope. Dominic moved around the fire and sat beside her close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Grace, you do not need to keep thanking me. What I am doing is right, and it is also my choice. I want to help you, not because you owe me gratitude, but because I believe in you and your fight for justice. He paused, then added softly, and because I'm beginning to care about what happens to you beyond just the principle of the thing. Grace's breath caught. She turned to look at him, at this man who had become so important to her in such a short time. In the firelight, his features were softer, more vulnerable. I am beginning to care about you too, she admitted, which is probably foolish given our circumstances and the likelihood that this all ends badly. Or maybe it is not foolish, Dominic said, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. Maybe it is just two people finding something good in the middle of difficult circumstances. Maybe it is exactly what we both need right now. Grace leaned into his touch, craving more of that tenderness, that connection. I am not whole, Dominic. That asylum broke things in me that might not heal. And even if we prove Richard killed my father, I will still be damaged, still be marked by what I have been through. You should know that before you say you care. We are all broken in some way, Dominic said, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with heartbreaking gentleness. My aunt's death broke something in me, made me question the world's fairness and people's goodness, but you are helping me heal from that, showing me that there is still courage and strength worth fighting for. Let me help you heal too, Grace. Let me be someone you can lean on when the weight gets too heavy. Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks, and she let them fall. I want to. I want that so much. But I am scared, Dominic. Scared of what happens if we fail, scared of losing someone else I care about, scared of feeling anything good when so much of my life has become darkness. Then be scared with me, Dominic said, gathering her into his arms, holding her while she cried against his chest. Be scared. But do not be alone. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, we face it together. I promise you that, Grace. You are not alone anymore. Grace wrapped her arms around him, holding tight to this unexpected gift of comfort and connection. They stayed like that for a long time, two wounded people finding solace in each other's presence. When Grace finally pulled back, Dominic wiped her tears away with his thumbs, his expression so tender it made her heart ache. We should sleep, he said softly. Tomorrow we should reach Nevada if we push hard. You need rest before we face Judge Harrison and whatever comes after. They settled in again, but this time Grace did not pretend there was any distance between them. She curled against Dominic's side, his arm around her shoulders, and felt safer than she had in months. His heartbeat was steady under her ear, a rhythm that promised continuity and survival. She fell asleep counting those beats, letting them anchor her to hope. Dawn came too quickly, but Grace woke feeling more rested than she had since before her father's death. Dominic was already up, preparing the horse and packing their meager camp. When he saw her stirring, he smiled, and Grace felt warmth bloom in her chest at the sight of it. Morning. How are you feeling? Sore but stronger, Grace admitted, stretching carefully. How much farther to Nevada? If we ride hard and the weather holds, we could make it by evening, Dominic said. But we need to talk about what happens when we get there. Judge Harrison may help, but he may also feel obligated to return you to Springfield, at least until your legal situation can be resolved. We need to be prepared for that possibility. Grace's stomach clenched at the thought of going back, even temporarily, but she forced herself to think practically. If he tries to send me back, I will run again. I cannot go back to that place, Dominic. I would rather die out here than spend another day in those cells. Then we make sure it does not come to that, Dominic said firmly. But we need a backup plan. If things go wrong with the judge, we head west immediately. I have some money saved, enough to get us both to California if necessary. You can make a new life there, somewhere Richard's influence cannot reach. Us? Grace repeated, hardly daring to hope she had heard correctly. You would come with me? Dominic met her eyes steadily. Grace, I am not letting you face this alone. Whether we stay and fight or run and rebuild, I am with you. That is my choice, freely made, and I am not going to change my mind because things get difficult. Grace crossed the space between them and kissed him, a quick press of lips that conveyed gratitude and growing affection and hope all tangled together. Dominic froze for a moment, surprised. Then his hands came up to cup her face as he kissed her back with gentle intensity. When they parted, both were breathing hard, eyes wide with the realization of what they had just acknowledged between them. I am sorry, Grace started, but Dominic shook his head. Do not apologize for that. I have wanted to kiss you since yesterday, but was not sure if you would welcome it. He smiled, that warm, open expression that made him handsome. But we should probably save the rest of this conversation for after we deal with the immediate crisis. Nevada is waiting, and we need clear heads for what comes next. They rode through the morning with new awareness humming between them, Grace's arms around Dominic's waist holding perhaps tighter than strictly necessary, his hand occasionally covering hers where it rested against his stomach. The landscape shifted gradually from rolling hills to flatter terrain as they approached Nevada, Missouri. The town appeared on the horizon in early afternoon, a collection of buildings clustered around the railroad tracks that connected it to larger cities east and west. Dominic pulled up on a rise overlooking the town, studying it carefully. We need to be smart about this. If there are notices out about you, the local sheriff might have received word. We should find Judge Harrison's residence first, approach him directly rather than going through official channels. How do we find him without asking questions that might draw attention? Grace asked. Leave that to me. You stay here, out of sight, while I go into town and gather information. It is safer than both of us risking exposure. Dominic helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering on her waist. Stay hidden in those trees. If I am not back in 2 hours, or if you see trouble coming, you head south following the creek. I will find you. Grace wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle herself, but pragmatism won out. She was the one being hunted, and her presence only made things more dangerous for both of them. Be careful. And Dominic, come back to me. He kissed her forehead, a gesture of tenderness and promise. Always. I have got too much to come back for now. Grace watched him ride into town, her heart in her throat. The wait was agonizing, every minute stretching into eternity. She paced the tree line, watching the town below, trying to spot Dominic's familiar figure among the distant shapes moving through the streets. An hour passed, then 90 minutes. Grace was beginning to seriously consider what it would mean to run again, to disappear into the frontier alone, when she spotted Dominic riding back up the hill at an unhurried pace that suggested no immediate pursuit. Judge Harrison lives on the east side of town, Dominic reported as he reached her. Small house with a green door right on the edge of town where it meets farmland. The general store owner was happy to give directions when I said I had legal business to discuss. No indication that anyone is actively looking for you here yet. But that could change quickly. We should go now while we still have surprise on our side. They approached Judge Harrison's house carefully, Dominic keeping watch while Grace knocked on the green door with a hand that shook only slightly. The man who answered was elderly, perhaps 70. With white hair and shrewd blue eyes that assessed Grace with uncomfortable intensity. Yes? Judge Harrison, my name is Grace Pemberton. I am Thomas Pemberton's daughter. I need your help, sir. Please. Recognition and surprise flashed across the judge's face. Grace Pemberton? But I heard you were committed to Springfield Asylum. How are you here? I escaped, sir, because I was wrongly committed by my stepbrother Richard after I witnessed him murder my father. I know how that sounds, but I swear to you it is the truth. My father spoke of you often, said you were a fair man and a good friend. I am begging you to hear my story before you decide whether to believe me or send me back." Judge Harrison's expression was unreadable, but he stepped back from the door. "Come inside, child, and bring your companion. If what you are saying is true, we have much to discuss. If it is not, well, I will know soon enough." Grace and Dominic entered the modest home, and the judge directed them to sit in his study, a room lined with law books and smelling of pipe tobacco. He settled into his chair behind the desk, his fingers steepled under his chin as he studied Grace with those sharp eyes. "Tell me everything from the beginning. Leave nothing out." Grace told him, her voice steady despite the fear and hope warring in her chest. She described the argument between Richard and her father, the shovel coming down with brutal force, her father's body crumpling. She told him about going to the sheriff, about the doctor's examination, about the swift commitment to the asylum. She told him about the treatments, the isolation, the systematic breaking of her spirit until she decided escape was her only option. Through it all, Dominic sat beside her, his presence a silent support, and Judge Harrison listened without interruption. When she finished, silence filled the study. Silence. The judge poured 3 glasses of whiskey from a decanter on his desk, passing them out before speaking. "Your father was a good man, Grace, one of the best I have known. When I heard of his death, something about it troubled me. Richard's story seemed too neat, too convenient, but I had no evidence of wrongdoing, and I'm just one judge in a small town. My authority only goes so far." "Do you believe me?" Grace asked, hardly daring to breathe. Judge Harrison took a long sip of his whiskey before answering. "I believe you witnessed something terrible, and that you believe your stepbrother killed your father. Whether I can prove it in a court of law is another matter entirely. Richard has covered his tracks well, and your commitment to the asylum complicates things significantly. Any lawyer worth his fee will argue that you are unreliable, that your memories are the product of a disturbed mind." "But she is not disturbed," Dominic interjected, speaking for the first time. "I am Dominic Garrett, sir. I found Grace in the woods after her escape, and I can testify that she has been completely lucid and rational in all our interactions. She is no madwoman." "And who are you to make such judgments, Mr. Garrett?" the judge asked, not unkindly. "Are you a doctor? A trained physician qualified to assess mental competency?" "No, sir, but I have spent significant time with her, and I have personal experience with wrongful asylum commitments in my own family. My aunt was institutionalized against her will by a husband who wanted rid of her. Grace's story has the ring of truth, and I believe her completely." Judge Harrison studied Dominic with new interest. "You are putting yourself at considerable risk helping an escaped asylum patient. That suggests either admirable courage or questionable judgment. Which is it, young man?" "Both, probably," Dominic said with a slight smile. "But mostly, it is a choice to stand with someone being treated unjustly by a system that gives too much power to men like Richard Pemberton. Grace deserves someone in her corner, and I am happy to be that someone." The judge's expression softened slightly. "Thomas would have liked you. I think he valued loyalty and courage." He turned back to Grace. "Here is what I can do. I can order an independent evaluation of your mental state by a doctor not connected to Richard or Springfield. If that evaluation finds you competent, I can question the original commitment and potentially open an investigation into your father's death. But Grace, you need to understand that this will take time, and during that time, you will need to be somewhere safe and legal. I cannot harbor an escaped patient, and I cannot let you run. That would make me complicit in evading the asylum's custody." "You are saying I have to go back," Grace said, feeling her hope crumble. "Not to Springfield," the judge said quickly, "but perhaps to a different facility, somewhere I can ensure you are treated fairly while the evaluation proceeds, or possibly under house arrest with a suitable guardian who can vouch for your whereabouts and behavior." "I will vouch for her," Dominic said immediately. "Let me be her guardian. I will take responsibility for her, ensure she does not flee, Bring her to any appointments or hearings required. Just do not send her back to an asylum, sir. She has suffered enough." Judge Harrison looked between them, his expression thoughtful. "You two have grown close in a very short time. Are you certain you understand what you are offering, Mr. Garrett? Serving as guardian for someone in Grace's position could take weeks or even months to resolve, and it would restrict your own freedom considerably." "I understand, sir, and I am certain." Dominic reached over and took Grace's hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Grace is not going through this alone." The judge was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. I will accept you as Grace's guardian on the condition that you both remain in Nevada where I can monitor the situation. I will send for Dr. Matthews from Kansas City, a colleague I trust to conduct an unbiased evaluation. In the meantime, you will check in with me daily, and Grace will not leave your supervision. Is that acceptable to both of you?" Grace felt tears of relief burn her eyes. "Yes, sir. Thank you, Judge Harrison. Thank you for believing me enough to try." "I am not saying I believe you completely yet," the judge warned, "but I am willing to investigate, which is more than you have had so far. Do not make me regret extending this trust, Grace. Your father's memory deserves better than to be tarnished by a daughter who proves unstable or dishonest." "I will prove worthy of your faith, sir," Grace promised, "and worthy of my father's memory. Richard will answer for what he did." They left the judge's house with instructions to find lodging in town and report back the following morning. Dominic secured a room at the boarding house run by a widow who asked few questions and seemed content with the story that Grace was his cousin recovering from illness. The room was small but clean, with a single bed and a chair by the window overlooking Nevada's main street. "I will sleep on the floor," Dominic said immediately, surveying the accommodations. "You take the bed." Grace shook her head. "We are past the point of that kind of propriety, Dominic. We have been sleeping close for 2 nights now, and Judge Harrison accepted you as my guardian, which implies a certain level of trust and intimacy between us already. The bed is big enough for both of us, and I would rather have you close than worry about your comfort on a hard floor." Dominic looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Grace's expression stopped him. "All right. But I want you to understand that I'm not expecting anything from you, Grace. Sharing a bed does not mean you owe me anything beyond what you are willing to freely give." "I know that," Grace said softly. "You have already proven you are a man of honor, Dominic Garrett. I trust you." They had dinner in the boarding house dining room, simple but filling food that tasted like luxury after days of trail rations. The widow who ran the establishment, Mrs. Helen Winters, was kind and talkative, keeping up a steady stream of conversation about town news and local personalities that required little response from her guests. Grace found herself relaxing into the normalcy of it, almost able to pretend she was just a woman traveling with a good man, not a fugitive awaiting judgment. When they retired to their room, there was a moment of awkwardness as they both prepared for bed. Grace changed into a nightgown Mrs. Winters had loaned her, and Dominic stripped down to his undershirt and trousers, looking anywhere but at Grace as he turned down the lamp. They climbed into bed from opposite sides, lying stiffly at first, careful not to touch. But gradually, as the night deepened and exhaustion claimed them both, they drifted together as naturally as rivers finding the sea. Grace found herself cradled against Dominic's chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her, and she had never felt safer in her life. "Dominic," she whispered into the darkness. What happens after? If Judge Harrison proves Richard killed my father, if I get my inheritance and my freedom back, what happens between us?" Dominic was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking her hair with gentle rhythm. "I suppose that depends on what you want to happen. I know my feelings, but I will not presume to know yours beyond the gratitude and affection born of crisis circumstances." Grace turned in his arms so she could see his face in the moonlight filtering through the window. "Tell me your feelings, please. I need to know if what I am feeling is just me or if it is mutual." Dominic cupped her face in his hand, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Grace, I am falling in love with you. Maybe I already have fallen, despite the short time we have known each other. I know that sounds impossible, but I cannot deny what is happening in my heart. You are brave and strong and fierce, and you make me want to be a better man, to fight for something bigger than just my own survival. If you get your freedom and your inheritance back, I would count myself blessed if you wanted me to be part of your life going forward. Not because I want your money or your ranch, but because I want you, exactly as you are. Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were good tears this time, healing tears. I am falling in love with you too. You saved me, not just from the cold and the asylum, but from losing hope and forgetting there was still goodness in the world. Whatever happens with Richard and the investigation, I want you in my life, Dominic. I want to build something with you, something real and lasting and true. He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Grace kissed him back, pouring months of loneliness and fear and longing into the connection of their lips. When they finally parted, both were breathing hard, eyes bright with tears and hope and love, too new to fully trust, but too strong to deny. We should sleep, Dominic murmured, pressing his forehead to hers. Tomorrow we start the real fight, and we need to be ready. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, two souls finding shelter in the storm, and Grace dreamed of her father smiling his approval. The next weeks passed in a blur of meetings, evaluations, and investigations. Dr. Matthews arrived from Kansas City, a stern-faced man in his 50s who subjected Grace to extensive questioning and observation. She answered his questions honestly, held nothing back, and let him see both her trauma and her resilience. At the end of 5 days, he submitted his report to Judge Harrison, declaring Grace Pemberton to be fully competent, rational, and showing no signs of hysteria or mental instability. Armed with that evaluation, Judge Harrison began quietly investigating Thomas Pemberton's death. He questioned the ranch hands who had been present the day of the supposed accident, interviewed the doctor who had examined the body, and reviewed the will that had left everything to Richard as the only surviving male heir. What he found was a pattern of inconsistencies and suspicious circumstances that built a compelling circumstantial case against Richard, even without direct evidence of murder. Meanwhile, Grace and Dominic settled into a strange domestic routine in Nevada. They took meals together, walked the town in the evenings, talked for hours about everything and nothing. Dominic found temporary work breaking horses for a local rancher, refusing to let Grace support them with the small amount of money Judge Harrison had released from her father's estate for living expenses. They were playing at normalcy, Grace realized, practicing what their life together might look like when the crisis passed. The feelings between them deepened with each passing day. They kissed goodnight and good morning, held hands when walking together, and shared a bed with growing intimacy that stopped just short of full consummation. Grace wanted more, wanted all of him, but Dominic insisted on waiting until her legal situation was resolved and they could come together free of desperation and uncertainty. I want you to choose me because you love me, not because you need me, he explained one night when they lay tangled together, breathless from kissing. When we finally come together fully, I want it to be two whole people joining their lives, not two broken people clinging to each other in crisis. Grace understood, even as her body ached for more. You are a good man, Dominic Garrett. My father would have loved you. I wish I could have met him, Dominic said softly. I wish I could have asked his blessing for courting his daughter properly instead of stumbling into her life during the worst moment imaginable. I think he sent you to me, Grace said, surprising herself with the sentiment. I think somehow he knew I would need someone exactly like you, and he made sure our paths crossed when they did. That probably sounds foolish. It sounds perfect, Dominic corrected, kissing her forehead. And I believe it too. Your father is still watching out for you, even from beyond the grave. 6 weeks after Grace's escape, Judge Harrison called them to his office with news that Richard had been arrested. The ranch hands, freed from fear of retaliation after the judge promised them protection, had admitted seeing Richard strike Thomas Pemberton with a shovel during an argument about selling ranch land. The doctor who examined the body had been convinced to re-examine his findings under scrutiny, and admitted the injuries were more consistent with a blow to the head than a fall from a horse. Most damningly, Judge Harrison had uncovered evidence that Richard had been selling ranch assets and pocketing the money, defrauding Grace's inheritance even as he kept her locked away. "He will stand trial for murder and fraud," the judge told them, his satisfaction evident. "And Grace, I have filed papers to overturn your commitment and restore your legal rights. You are a free woman in every sense of the word." Grace felt like she could breathe fully for the first time in months. "What happens to the ranch?" "It is yours, as your father intended. Richard's claim is void, and all the sales he made are being reviewed for reversal where possible. You have lost some parcels, but the heart of your inheritance remains intact." Judge Harrison smiled, rare warmth in his stern features. "Your father would be proud of how you fought, Grace. You honored his memory with your courage." That night, Grace and Dominic celebrated with a real dinner at Nevada's best restaurant, such as it was. They ate steak and potatoes, drank wine that was more vinegar than vintage, and laughed with the relief of people who had survived something terrible and come through stronger. When they returned to their boarding house room, Grace locked the door behind them and turned to Dominic with clear intention in her eyes. "Make love to me," she said simply. "We are whole people now, free people, choosing each other because we love each other. I do not want to wait anymore." Dominic crossed the room in 3 strides and gathered her into his arms, kissing her with passion that had been carefully restrained for weeks. "Are you certain? We do not have to rush this." "I am certain," Grace said, her fingers working the buttons of his shirt. "I love you, Dominic Garrett. I choose you freely and completely. Now show me that you feel the same." He did, with tenderness and passion and love that made Grace feel cherished and whole. They came together in the small boarding house bed, 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds, and they sealed their commitment with their bodies as they had already sealed it with their hearts. Afterwards, lying tangled in the sheets, with moonlight painting silver across their skin, Grace felt truly free for the first time since her father's death. "Marry me," Dominic said quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time, but I am certain of this, Grace. Certain of you. Certain of us. Certain that I want to spend the rest of my life loving you and building something beautiful together. Marry me and let us turn your ranch into our ranch, our home, our future." Grace turned in his arms, her smile bright enough to rival the moon. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. I want to marry you, Dominic. I want to build that future together, want to honor my father's memory by making the ranch thrive, want to fill it with children and love and all the things Richard tried to destroy." They made love again, slower this time, savoring each other now that they knew they had time, had forever stretching before them. When they finally slept, it was as 2 people completely committed to each other, and Grace's dreams were full of hope and possibility. Richard's trial was swift and conclusive. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was sentenced to hang for murder. Grace attended the trial, feeling her father's presence beside her as justice was finally served. She felt no joy in Richard's conviction, no satisfaction in his fear as sentence was pronounced. She felt only closure, the ability to finally grieve her father properly and begin moving forward with her life. She and Dominic were married in Nevada's small church 3 weeks later, with Judge Harrison giving her away and Mrs. Winters serving as witness. It was a simple ceremony, no fancy clothes or elaborate reception, but it was perfect. Grace wore a dress Mrs. Winters helped her sew, pale blue calico that made her feel pretty and bridal. Dominic wore his best clothes and looked at her like she was the sun breaking through clouds. When they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought, Grace knew she was exactly where she belonged. They returned to the ranch in early spring of 1884, ready to begin their life together. The place showed signs of Richard's neglect, but the bones of what her father had built remained strong. Grace and Dominic threw themselves into restoration with the help of ranch hands who had stayed loyal to the Pemberton name. They repaired fences, purchased new stock, and slowly brought the land back to productive beauty. The work was hard but satisfying, made sweeter by doing it together. Grace had never been happier than she was working alongside her husband, planning their future and honoring her father's legacy. Dominic proved to be an excellent rancher, his skill with horses and natural leadership earning the respect of the hands. Together they made the ranch not just survive but thrive. Their first child, a boy they named Thomas after Grace's father, was born in the winter of 1885. Grace labored through the night with Dominic holding her hand, and when the baby finally arrived with a lusty cry, she saw tears in her husband's eyes. "He looks like your father," Dominic said, cradling the tiny bundle. "He has the same determined set to his jaw." "Then he will be a fighter," Grace said, exhausted but happy. "Like his grandfather, like his parents. We will raise him to be strong and kind, to stand up for what is right, even when it is hard." Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Margaret, after Dominic's aunt, then another son, Samuel, and finally a second daughter, Carolyn. The ranch house that had been so lonely in Grace's youth filled with the noise and chaos and joy of children. They grew up running through fields, learning to ride almost before they could walk, hearing stories of their brave grandfather and the love story that had brought their parents together. Grace never forgot the darkness of those Asylum months, but she learned to hold that memory alongside the light of everything that came after. She spoke publicly about Asylum reform, working with Judge Harrison and others to change commitment laws and provide better protections for vulnerable women. Her testimony helped pass legislation in Missouri that required multiple medical opinions and judicial review before anyone could be institutionalized against their will. Dominic supported her advocacy work while building his own reputation as one of the finest horse breeders in Missouri. His stock was sought after across the state, and the ranch prospered beyond even Grace's father's dreams. But more than the success or the growing wealth, they treasured the life they had built together, the family they had created, the love that had started in such impossible circumstances and grown into something unshakable. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Grace and Dominic stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Missouri sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their children were grown now, Thomas running the ranch alongside them, Margaret teaching school in Nevada, Samuel studying law in Kansas City, and Caroline preparing for her own wedding in the fall. Grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "Walking away from your freedom that morning you found me? Taking on all my troubles and burdens?" Dominic wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Not for one single moment. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace. You gave me purpose, family, love, and a life richer than I ever imagined possible. If I had to do it all again, I would make exactly the same choice." Grace kissed him, their lips meeting with the comfortable familiarity of two people who had loved each other through every season of life. "I love you, Dominic Garrett. Thank you for believing me when no one else did. Thank you for saving me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me." "I love you too, Grace Garrett," Dominic said against her lips. "I always have, always will. You saved me just as much as I saved you, you know. We saved each other." As twilight settled over the ranch, Grace thought of her father and hoped he could see what she had built from the ashes of tragedy he had left behind. She hoped he knew that his legacy lived on, not just in the land and the cattle, but in the family that bore his name and his values. Most of all, she hoped he knew that the cowboy who had believed his daughter when the rest of the world called her mad had become the truest, finest man she had ever known. And together they had created something beautiful and lasting and real. The asylum where Grace had suffered was eventually closed following investigations into patient abuse, its dark halls finally emptied of tortured souls. Richard's execution had brought justice but not joy, a necessary end but not a source of celebration. and Judge Harrison, that good man who had chosen to investigate rather than dismiss, had officiated at all 4 of Grace and Dominic's children's weddings before passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 89. Life had not been perfect. They had faced droughts and hard winters, lost friends and family to illness and accident, struggled through the ordinary challenges that came with raising children and running a business. But through it all, Grace and Dominic had faced everything together, 2 people bound by love that had been forged in crisis and tempered by time into something unbreakable. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their eldest grandchild, 6-year-old Thomas Jr., ran up to the porch demanding a story. Grace gathered the boy onto her lap, Dominic settling beside them, and she began to tell him the story she had told all her children. The story of how their grandmother had escaped from a terrible place and how their grandfather had believed her truth when no one else would. "And they loved each other forever and ever?" young Thomas asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "Forever and ever," Grace confirmed, smiling at her husband over the child's head. "Because real love, the kind that matters, does not give up when things get hard. It holds on tight and fights for what is right, and believes in the goodness of the person you love, even when the whole world says otherwise." "That is a good story, Grandma," Thomas said, snuggling into her embrace. "I want to find love like that someday." "You will," Dominic promised, ruffling the boy's hair. "When you are ready, when the time is right, love will find you, maybe when you least expect it, maybe when you need it most. That is how the best love stories begin." Grace looked out over the ranch she had fought so hard to keep, the life she had built with the man she loved, the family that filled her days with purpose and joy. She thought about the girl she had been, terrified and broken in that asylum cell, and the woman she had become, strong and loved and free. The journey between those 2 versions of herself had been painful and difficult, but it had led her here to this perfect moment of peace and completion. "Tell us the story again, Grandma," Thomas pleaded, as other grandchildren began gathering on the porch, drawn by the promise of their favorite tale. So Grace told it again, the story of escape and belief, of justice hard won and love unexpectedly found. She told it the way she always did, honestly and completely, holding nothing back, because she wanted her grandchildren to understand that happy endings were possible even after terrible beginnings, that healing could come even after terrible wounding, that love could bloom even in the darkest circumstances if 2 people were brave enough to choose each other and hold on tight. As the night deepened and the children finally dispersed to their beds, Grace and Dominic remained on the porch, sitting close together in the darkness. They did not need words anymore after 25 years together. The silence between them was comfortable, full of shared history and mutual understanding. "No regrets?" Dominic asked again, echoing Grace's earlier question. "Not a single one," Grace confirmed. "Every moment of pain and fear was worth it because it led me to you, to this, to the life we have built together. I would walk through fire for this, Dominic, for you, for our family, for the love we share." "Then we are both blessed beyond measure," Dominic said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles with the same reverence he had shown on their wedding day, "because I feel exactly the same way." They sat together under the stars, 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something extraordinary from tragedy and trauma. They had proven that love could heal, that justice was worth fighting for, that believing in someone when the whole world called them mad was not foolish but brave. Their story would be told to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a legacy of courage and faith and love that would outlast even the physical legacy of the ranch itself. As the grandfather clock in the hall chimed midnight, marking the end of their anniversary and the beginning of a new day, Grace and Dominic finally rose and headed inside. They climbed the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for a quarter century, hands linked together as they had been from almost the first moment they met. They prepared for bed with the easy synchronization of long marriage, sliding under the covers and finding each other in the darkness as naturally as breathing. "I love you, Grace," Dominic whispered, his arms coming around her. I love you too, Dominic, Grace whispered back. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for everything. Thank you for stumbling into my camp that morning, Dominic replied. Thank you for being brave enough to escape, to fight, to survive. Thank you for choosing me and building this life with me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Grace Garrett. And I thank God every day that I was the one you found in those woods. They fell asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, as they had every night for 25 years, as they would every night for all the years remaining to them. Outside, the Missouri wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of coming rain and the promise of another season on the ranch. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied softly, and cattle settled down for the night. The ranch that Thomas Pemberton had built, that Richard had tried to steal, that Grace had fought to reclaim, and that she and Dominic had restored to glory, slept peacefully under the stars. Their story had begun with iron bars and injustice, with asylum walls, and a desperate escape into the frozen wilderness, but it had become a story of love and redemption, of two wounded souls finding healing in each other, of justice prevailing and family thriving. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating for all the generations that would come after. And when Grace Garrett finally passed away at the age of 87, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with Dominic holding her hand just as he had held it through all the important moments of their life together, her last words were simple and true. I chose well. We built something beautiful. I have no regrets. Dominic followed her 6 months later, his heart unable to continue without its other half. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a stone that read, Grace and Dominic Garrett. She was brave. He believed. Together they built a legacy of love. And the ranch they had loved continued thriving under their children's care, a living testament to the power of faith, courage, and love that refused to surrender even in the darkest circumstances. The story of the woman who escaped the asylum and the cowboy who believed her became part of Nevada, Missouri's history, told and retold until it passed into legend, until it passed. But for those who had lived it, for Grace and Dominic and their children and grandchildren, it was never just a story. It was the foundation of everything good in their lives, the proof that happy endings were possible even after terrible beginnings, the reminder that sometimes the worst moments could lead to the best outcomes if people were brave enough to fight for each other and believe in the possibility of justice and healing and love that conquered all obstacles. And in the end, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything